pronounce your name Dalia?
Yeah, it's just Dalia. All right. Hi, everyone. We're going to start in 2 to 3 minutes, just giving some time for everyone to join. All right, so let's start. I think we have pretty much enough people already. All right, so my name is Dalia. Hi, everyone. On behalf of Ideas, I'm very excited to have you all today. Today's topic is the state of blockchain and cryptocurrencies with Chris Kameir. Big thanks to everyone who can join us today. And for those who are just watching the video on our YouTube channel, hope you can join us online next time. Before we jump into the webinar itself, and while some people are still joining, let me just briefly remind you what is Ideas, what we do, and why we do that. So I hope everyone can see my screen. So Ideas is International Data Engineering and Science Association, and it's a nonprofit organization. So we are based in Los Angeles, California. Our mission is to bridge the gap between academia and industry. So basically, we're like very excited about data science, machine learning, AI, and blockchains, of course. So we are like sharing this enthusiasm with others, and we are here to connect those passionate people from blockchain data science background with each other to share the ideas and thoughts and just simply collaborate. This is our roadmap. So we started in 2016 and we're moving and we're hosting conferences across the country. So 3 years ago, our first conference was held in the USC campus. in California, and later we started to grow rapidly, organizing conferences across the country. So we had a lot of different conferences on different topics across the country: New York, Chicago, Boston, also LA. The huge one that we had was so-called conference at Los Angeles Convention Center, the one that was in October 26th. Apart from the conferences, we also do a lot of hackathons. So this is our like photo gallery, the very first one, 2016 so-called conference. This is the New York Blockchain Leadership Connect. This is the Chicago one blockchain. This is 2017 so-called conference. This is 2018. I believe we still don't have a lot of photos from 2019, but this is our like photo gallery. So we do have a lot of conferences, the big one, and we do attract a lot of people from academia and industry as well. So as I told you, apart from just conferences, we also have a lot of hackathons, online workshop as this one, weekly webinars on different topics with different interesting guest speakers. So you can check our website for more information on upcoming conferences. This is our website. You can also connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, of course. This is QR code for our YouTube channel where you can find different webinars, including this one. So now let me introduce our wonderful speaker for today. His name is Chris Kameir. He is a managing partner at blockchain venture fund Sustaining Capital in Newport Beach. So Chris has been a technology entrepreneur since a very early days and led a merger of two of the earliest internet service providers in Europe. So after that, he immigrated from Germany to California to establish international technology investment firm. After founding a Yelp predecessor in 2004, he sold the company, the operation, in 2008. So Christian joined the board of several high-tech companies. He is a certified in NLP and also a graduate of Monster School of Law. So Chris is a member of Forbes Finance Council, and he's a seasoned public speaker on topics ranging from high-tech investment to blockchain solution. So welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for doing that. And again, from our organization and from our audience, we are very excited to hear your topic for today.
Well, thank you, Dalia. Do I have the screen?
Yeah, you can share the screen.
Okay, let's do that. All right. Yeah, so as Dalia mentioned, I've been in technology investing for about 20 years. I was a hacker in the early 80s and then decided to go to law school and then became general counsel for one of the very first internet service providers. And luckily enough, we sold that service provider at the height of the .com. And so that allowed me then to retire from the law, move to California to join a venture fund. Our original focus was on peer-to-peer technology, specifically voice over IP and also multi-massive online player games. And so when the blockchain topic emerged, this was something that we were already sort of familiar with in the sense of that blockchains deal with peer-to-peer solutions. And we also had virtual currencies at that point in time for many of the online games that you would know. So needless to say, today we see anywhere between 10 and 20 projects every week. We started this not under this label, but 5 years ago. So we have seen a few thousand projects at this particular time and continue this to date. Most of our employees here are engineers, 2/3. So we have a very technology focus, very technology driven. But today, what I'm presenting to you is, needless to say, the technology investor's perspective. So first, some of the basics, because unfortunately, reality doesn't have an advertising budget. And so what you find online, for the most part, is actually not what's really happening. And so most importantly, if you haven't read it already, I assume most people on this call have, please read the Bitcoin white paper. And I circled this one particular term here, peer-to-peer. This is one of the most important things to understand. This is what this technology is all about. And what this paper didn't introduce was blockchain technology. A lot of times people refer to it as this was the introduction of blockchain technology. The paper actually references the original blockchain technology and actually never makes use of the word blockchain itself. So what are the actual innovations that the paper introduced? So first and foremost, and most importantly, most likely, a digital bearer instrument. And I'll expand on the bearer instrument component in a little while, but maybe two differentiations are important to understand because they are often not being mentioned. There's two types of bearer instrument. One are the blockchain native. So those are the coins, i.e. Bitcoin as the native instrument, and then those that are protocol based. So those we typically refer to as tokens. And if you're familiar with CoinMarketCap, you can actually filter the listed tokens and coins based on this criterion. Then secondarily, and oftentimes people forget that, Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin white paper specifically introduces this concept of smart contracts. Those are self-executing programs and oftentimes are referred to as unstoppable code. And then lastly, and that's probably long-term the most important invention, is that of a decentralized autonomous organization. So where governance is solely regulated by code and executed by network participants, which then, and that's the more important component of this, aligns the interests of the participants in that network. And I'm gonna explain this a little bit later in more detail. So first of all, as an investor, we first have to understand what's the problem that's being solved, right? So every day people come here or present to us over the phone and they are claiming that they are solving one or more problem, that before that a particular invention of and implementation of their technology didn't exist. And oftentimes these are the things that are being pointed out, i.e. the banks and other middlemen like lawyers and accountants and so forth, and then also money in its legacy form. And these are the solutions that are often being offered to us. And I use this symbol or this metaphor of a vending machine for that of smart contracts. And then other than that, you probably know there's now thousands of coins, most of which are probably not that important, but a lot of which you see on here, you probably came across in this particular field. So are those actual solutions? So let's peel back a little bit and see what we have now. Oftentimes when we talk about money, we're using a very old definition that refers back to an English economist called Jevons, and he created this definition in 1876 and refers to money as a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. So the same year that Jevons created this particular definition, also the guy who founded or created the telephone got a patent for that. And needless to say, the telephone that he invented doesn't resemble the telephone that you all have in your pockets right now, and neither does money. But unfortunately, most bankers and technologists still use this definition. So it's important to understand that this is no longer true. So let's divvy this out. First of all, medium of exchange. What's medium of exchange? Medium of exchange today typically works like this. You got Bob. Bob wants to send Mary some money. Bob banks with Bank of No Returns, and Mary banks with Chase Me If You Can Bank. So if Bob wants to send Mary some money, what does he do? He initiates a transfer. What happens? Technically, it's the manipulation of bits. So the point here being, the medium of exchange has defaulted for quite some time to bytes. So don't let anybody tell you anything else. Oftentimes you hear this idea that Bitcoin is a medium of exchange or other implementations are medium of exchange. they all are the same in terms of the underlying technology. It's always the exchange of bytes. And another important thing to understand is the current systems, because this guy here, Bob, has a ledger that's being manipulated by Bank of No Returns, and Mary has a ledger by Chase Me If You Can Bank. So these are actually distributed, or more accurately referred to as federated distributed ledger technologies. So whenever someone explains blockchain as DLT, he is utterly wrong. Current systems are DLTs, and oftentimes federated DLTs, because these two banks have also to reconcile their particular accounts with the Federal Reserve System if it's in the United States. So let's look at the second component of the old definition, store value. You all probably remember and maybe still have pennies and nickels and dimes, but think about it, when was the last time when you actually used this to purchase something? Initially, when pennies were introduced, you actually could buy the New York Times with that. You can try this today, it won't work. So what do I mean? Every fiat currency, so every government created currency, or actually technically is really not a currency, but I explain that in more detail, has died. Every fiat currency that was invented by governments over time dies. The average lifetime of a fiat is less than 27 years. So store value, even though it's obviously a function of time, for fiat, well, probably not so true. And typically I tell people, well, do you store $1 million in your checking account? No, you don't, because it's losing value. Specifically, if you're in a higher inflation country, like if you were in Venezuela, you wouldn't hold it for even an hour. So that leaves us with unit of account. So unit of accounts could be dollars, or could be euros, could be yen. Does it matter? It doesn't, because the underlying mechanism of exchange is still bytes. The unit of account is just that. It's just language. It's for you to understand whatever symbol you have been indoctrinated in during your lifetime to understand the value, quote unquote, you're looking at. So what I'm getting at here is that the functions of money have separated for quite some time. So this is the actual problem that's being solved by money. I have a cow, the barkeep doesn't have change for a cow, so I need to find a suitable medium of exchange. Well, today that's bytes. So unfortunately, still today, and I've been hearing this for 5 years now, people come here and introduce us to the idea of cryptocurrency adoption. Well, needless to say, this particular sentence is incomplete. So adoption by who and adoption for what? And typically what the insinuation is here is it's the adoption for payment by everybody. Well, I use this particular banana sign to ask yourself whether or not at any point in the future you expect to see a Bitcoin sign or any other quote unquote cryptocurrency on a banana. My prediction is probably not. So what we need in essence is to complete the technology stack to enable what we refer to money over IP, or more importantly, assets over IP. Meaning whatever your counterparty wants as his particular unit of account, you'll be able to send him without you needing to think about it. You just look at your phone, you see the unit of account you're accustomed to, and typically, let's say you're in Great Britain, and you're accustomed to dollars, you would have to translate this into whatever value you understand. Well, in the future, don't expect this to happen, but more importantly, you don't actually have to physically move into any legacy fiat instruments anymore. So money is the most simple value exchange, and by default, blockchains do this pretty easily, pretty handily. What's more complicated is if you have other assets. And right now, the most obvious example of other assets is this one, this CryptoKitty. which you've probably seen or heard at least. And they were sold for as much as $140,000, but it's somewhat of a novelty. But the point here is that you can now record unique individual items reliably on a blockchain. So where this becomes relevant is if you have in-game items, so that you can actually own in-game items and peer-to-peer sell those. And if you have media files in the future, think of decentralized iTunes or another decentralized media database where you can actually own and buy the item and then later on sell it on the secondary marketplace or peer-to-peer to someone else without the need of a middleman who's charging you a fee. And more importantly, right now, what you're getting is only a limited license. I'm old enough to have bought CDs and before that, long plays. And I was accustomed to actually own those music media and then sell them if I didn't want them anymore. This paradigm has kind of waned, but with this particular technology, we can create this. So question now, are we tokenizing the world? And you probably have heard this many times now that people start to tokenize securities and start tokenizing real estate and essentially any other asset. Unfortunately, we are kind of very far away from that because the current state of the protocols are very, very simple. So I don't expect to see actual security tokens anytime soon. That has multiple reasons. A, there's always this idea that token need to comply. Well, they need to comply with laws and then need to comply with what laws? Is your token going to be tradable on the Sabbath? Is it tradable in the United States? Is it tradable in Great Britain? Is it tradable in Germany? If that's the question you ask yourself, you actually don't have a token anymore, at least not at this particular point in time, being that a token is the digital bearer instrument, the peer-to-peer solution that you should be able to transfer without reverting back to a data silo. Current solutions are basically DLTs at best and most likely database solutions that use the term token or use the term blockchain, but are actually far, far away from actually implementing any of these technical solutions thus far. So the most important concept, as I mentioned, is that of assets over IP, money being the simplest one. So we sketched out something that we expect to see in the future and hopefully in the near future. Think about any item being created on a blockchain. So you can create a unique item and typically you will see a QR code for that. And then you have the real world. So in the real world, this QR code could be attached to ownership rights to a bottle. Then you hand it over on a blockchain, this one being Ethereum, to another person. And mind you, you're just handing over the right to the bottle. You're not handing over the bottle itself. At that point in time, maybe the bottle starts moving and you track it on another blockchain such as IOTA, that's the IOTA symbol, while it's being stored accurately and the token accumulates the particular metadata that this blockchain carries, i.e. was it always kept at the same temperature or was it exposed to heat and shouldn't have and the bottle might be spoiled, and this information can be carried forward. And then I may want to sell it and use Stellar, the symbol here for Stellar, to communicate with a point of sale system and eventually hand this over to the final buyer, maybe using an application built on USIO. And then you receive the original token and you can see the history of this particular real world item as it went through the supply chain. This is a super important concept, specifically in the context of assigning rights and assets. And here I need to stop because a lot of times, due to the limitations of the legal system in the United States, which is not as codified as most European laws, people confuse the two. There's assets and there are rights under European laws, and you want to always keep those separate. So the point here being is, in many jurisdictions, property rights are being discussed for information pertaining to you as a person. And you probably know that we have CCPA coming up in California, and that will allow you to enforce some of these rights and actually allow you to reach out to all the data accumulators and ask them to tell you who they sold this data to, and also ask them to delete it. This graphic, by the way, I almost made 10 years ago or so, when I pointed out that we are all just products that Google is selling. The point here is that my main motivation to get in the space was that I realized that we never built the World Wide Web. What I mean by that is we built the commercial web. The commercial web that's being ruled and filtered by very few entities for data access, for data distribution. When you search, you're actually not searching. You're running a query against Google's advertising index, and it spends most of its energy by trying to match their advertising against you as what they are selling. What we're working on as a community is a concept called self-sovereign identity, which will let you own your data and force those data collectors to opt into you versus needing to opt out of data collection. A very important concept also then obviously to reliably assign rights and assets on a public blockchain without the need of middlemen. So how is blockchain going to affect the sharing economy? We also and already have seen solutions that work on decentralized Airbnb, decentralized Uber, and there's already 2 cities where solutions exist for that, because sharing economy so far meant you sharing your resources with those large corporations, but they don't really share back. And obviously, they're also still using the old payment rails. And as an Uber driver, we've learned that Uber takes 20 to up to 30% of what their revenue is. In the new paradigm using blockchain-based solutions, these will be true sharing economies, as in we actually can transact peer-to-peer without these middlemen. Here's an application that already exists, D.Tube or DTube, that you can access right now. It's Decentralized YouTube. As you probably know, a lot of people that have put out content on YouTube specifically have been what's called demonetized, meaning they didn't do anything necessarily wrong, but advertisers disliked it, and so all of a sudden they lost their main income stream overnight without any recourse or any way of getting their content back into a monetization stream. DTube is entirely decentralized and also uses entirely decentralized storage rails. And we expect to see pretty soon decentralized Facebook implementations, social media implementations, where a single corporation cannot revoke access to that data and cannot deplatform you. So the way I like to explain this on a more technical level is the following. So when the internet first was developed, we started out with some very simple, albeit very powerful protocols, specifically an internet protocol. We added to this later with file transfer protocols, transmission control protocols, and then this will be most visible to you, simple mail protocols. Think about it this way. Before we had SMTP, what did you do? You bought envelopes, you bought stamps, you printed out or hand-wrote letter, you took it to the post office, you spent whatever, 35 cents to mail that letter, and then this letter would get to its recipient either the next day, the next week, depending on where it needed to go. Well, needless to say, with email, that's not the case. If today everybody in the United States had to put a stamp on every email being sent, it would exceed the gross domestic product of the entire country within a matter of days. So that's the power of protocols. So then we introduced hypertext, and that made the World Wide Web possible. And we introduced voice over IP. I still remember the days, even when I moved here 20 years ago, when we had to pay $1.50 for phone calls to Germany. $1.50, not for the entire call, but per minute. So we would talk really, really fast. Needless to say, today you all probably have phones in your pocket and you pay $50, $60 a month and you talk as much as you want. Again, this is the power of one particular protocol. Hence, what we expect to see now is money over IP protocols, and we already have those. They're just not very usefully implemented yet. And then consequently, asset over IP protocols, so more complex rights and assets that can be transferred peer-to-peer. And then finally, identity. Identity is super complex, super important. We've just recently made our first investment in the biometric field stored on the blockchain, but it needs to be solved. So as far as paradigm shifts are concerned, some of my colleagues in the Bay Area have proposed a graph that looked something like that. Well, in the past we had a protocol layer and we had these application layers, and these application layers, they harvested all the value that was being transacted on top of them. So think about the usual suspects, JP Morgan Chase sending money on the internet protocol layer versus sending physical checks around, and other service providers, Google obviously, Facebook. None of those companies, needless to say, build any of those protocols. They just build applications on top of that. And then solutions like Uber also use those protocols. So while applications will not necessarily shrink, a lot of the value that's being right now harvested by these legacy service providers will move to the protocol, albeit without you needing to pay for it. So think of Bitcoin. Again, lowercase b Bitcoin is the mining reward. Uppercase Bitcoin is the Bitcoin blockchain, the Bitcoin network. So expect that there will be value there, but the main value will actually not be harvested by anybody, if at all, by the network. So what's the opportunity from an investor's perspective? It's the largest in anybody's lifetime. It's several orders of magnitude larger than the initial stages of the internet. These are just a few examples. They don't necessarily address the entire spectrum, such as healthcare and other parts of the economy who now have many, many rent-seeking middlemen involved. So last and most importantly, as I indicated in my introduction, this is our current model for most of capital formation. Someone is forming a for-profit corporation, so he's the operator. We hire employees, we generate some clients, we engage with some suppliers, then maybe we sell some stocks to some shareholders if and when the company goes public. And then we also need to necessarily probably engage with governments and pay our pound of flesh in form of taxes. Well, that is today. The future for many of the verticals that you're familiar with will be dominated by decentralized autonomous organization. So where you have owners, investors, users, employees, and suppliers, partners, all being part of the actual network and all sharing in its productivity. Bitcoin today is the most prominent example of a DAO. We already see networks evolving that let other verticals create new DAOs very simply. But long term, this is one of the most important paradigm shifts, and that of decentralization, that everybody who's creating applications today should keep in mind, because these are the type of formations you'll be competing with your for-profit corporation. So this was relatively quick, and I want to leave a good amount of time for questions for you guys to ask, but I typically publish an article every other month or so on Forbes, and typically expand on that later on Hacker Noon. So if you just Google for my last name, it's pretty easy to find, or just go on Hacker Noon or Forbes and look for the latest things that I published there, specifically on the state of money, security tokens, and other concepts that have been touched on earlier. All right, and then now I hand it over for you guys to ask me anything you want.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think we don't, yeah, I believe we don't have any questions so far, but guys, feel free to type your questions in the chat box or Q&A box. I think this presentation was very interesting and very informative, something that everyone should take specifically for themselves. Okay, I guess while still people are thinking of the questions,
I put everybody to sleep. Well, it's Saturday afternoon. It's amazing that people actually made it. There's a lot of dedication if you spend your Saturday afternoon on a somewhat technical topic.
I think it's just a lot to process still.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Actually, I have one question. Could you please elaborate more on the new vision of application layers on top of the protocols?
Sure, yeah. So I was hesitant to add this because that's another rabbit hole to go into. So the current state of blockchains, they are mostly applications in my mind, as in the actual protocols are still being developed. So that's why I put out the slide earlier where you saw the different protocols and the different protocol levels. So at the moment, blockchains don't really fit neatly into this particular paradigm, as in they're not sitting really on the infrastructure level. So the point there being is that dApps that are building on another applications are really, really hard to access, right? So you need to actually have a runner such as MetaMask, and then you log into the dApp for the most part. And if you go to a website such as dApp Radar, you'll see the ones that are somewhat prominent, although they are very, very nascent. So the next level here that we start to see is something that's more akin to what we consider layer 0 solutions or graph solutions, where a lot of the infrastructure is actually moving on this technical protocol level. That was very, that was probably more technical than you needed it to be. But so yeah, the bigger point here being is as long as you still need to log into what we call a runner, like a MetaMask, you will see very little adoption, obviously. And that's also why when you have a wallet on your mobile phone, it typically links you out in a browser and then runs the dApp there, the decentralized application. And most of those currently run on Ethereum. There's bunches that are running on EOS.io and some on IOTA. But I think the more interesting part there is the DeFi, so the decentralized finance solutions that are coming up on Ethereum that we're paying a lot of attention to, meaning where you have loan systems already that we allocated to that don't require middlemen. So you can stake cryptocurrency, there's no middleman involved, and you can earn interest. And you can already do this with fiat synthetics, so with a USDC or with a Tether, and earn quite a bit of interest. So the one app that I'm using that we invested in pays at least 8%, often 11% interest on what's essentially a fiat, a synthetic.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. We do have a couple of questions more. One question from Daniel. Why haven't the banks been more open to implementing blockchain technology? Well,
yeah, so it's really funny when banks mention that they have blockchain patents or something. That's obviously nonsense, right? So blockchain replaces banks. That's kind of one of the main points here, right? So there is really no play for a bank to use a blockchain. At best, what they are doing, and there's a few banks that are more forthcoming and more interested in doing this, is DLT, so distributed or shared ledger. Because as I explained earlier, the current technologies are really federated distributed ledger systems. If you have a shared ledger, the transaction can obviously occur much, much faster. And by transaction, I mean the actual settlement. Because oftentimes what you hear is declarations such as, well, Bitcoin only allows for 4 transactions a second or 7 or whatever the number is. It doesn't matter. The point is a different one here. When you transfer a digital bearer instrument, it settles. It's immediately settled. It's immutably transferred to you. Just like if I give you $1 out of my pocket, give it to you, the transaction is settled. If I transfer something from a bank account to another, it's not settled within maybe 24 hours. If you transfer it internationally, it's settled in a week. That's not necessarily a technology impediment. However, if you remove that impediment, the bank will lose anywhere between 1% and 2% of its float. Float is the money that you send. It's not in your account anymore. It's not in the account of the recipient, but it's on the bank's balance sheet and then on their disposal. These are billions of dollars that the bank gets to make interest on, 2%. So there's very little motivation for banks to settle transaction immediately when this is actually their working capital. And there's other impediments. So maybe one thing that I was considering implementing into this particular presentation is a topic that recently is being discussed by several Federal Reserve systems, especially China, but then also more recently in the United States, which is that of a Federal Reserve-backed quote-unquote digital dollar. Well, if I introduce a digital dollar, i.e. basically a synthetic version of the US dollar that has the backing of the Federal Reserve, do I need a commercial bank? You technically don't need any of the commercial banks at this point anymore, because it would immediately reconcile with the main ledger, with the unified ledger. So banks, commercial banks, should be very worried about this particular paradigm coming up.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, Daniel, for your question. I guess your question is answered. The second question from Charles is, I'm a software engineer just starting with blockchain. What technology should I be focused on? Ethereum or Hyperledger Fabric?
Well, I'm needless to say biased. We created the Ethereum meetups here in Orange County 5 years ago. Personally, I don't think of Hyperledger as a blockchain. There's no consensus mechanism such as the one on Ethereum. And I don't find it to be very interesting technology. It's at the end of the day, what they're doing, it's basically some form of distributed ledger technology. So I would focus on actual blockchain solutions, because if you think back in time, IBM tried to create a web browser. And by the way, this is in a way how the open source movement started. This web browser that they created, they were obviously trying to sell. Well, it was very buggy, and so people got together and fixed those bugs. They patched those bugs. Today we have a browser, it's called Apache, which is a reference to patching this particular web browser. So needless to say, IBM hasn't sold web browsers, ever. Open source is, I always use the reference to evolution. Open source is the implementation of a law called the law of requisite variety, means the most flexible in any given system will eventually rule the system. This is the way how you think about open source solutions best, because when we allocate to a particular paradigm, we most likely pay a lot of attention who is supporting it, meaning how many developers are actually paying attention to this, are implementing it. And there's another detail, I don't know if we want to go down this rabbit hole, but oftentimes when you see companies pronouncing that they now created a new standard, i.e. a security standard, they will throw around acronyms. Make sure to look those up, i.e. there's companies throwing around, hey, we created a security token standard called ERC 1400. If you go to the official website of Ethereum, you won't find it there, which means the community is not supporting it. So that's like saying, well, we're supporting it on our little network here, but as soon as you want to transfer it to any other wallet, this particular wallet will not support it. So long story short, yeah, look was the largest developer community and focus on cutting edge solutions within that developer community. Something that we've, as of late, pay a lot of attention to, which is a niche topic that most people have never heard of, is something like multi-party computing, which is computing on actual hashed encrypted data. As in, you don't, as a provider, even of an application, want to be left with storing any information that is either private, as in its personal data, or transactional data. In some jurisdictions that are more enlightened, this data by default needs to be private, i.e. transfer data of any type of funds in Canada is protected by privacy rights. And that's needless to say how it should be. So you always want to work off the largest common denominator, and in this case, the largest protection. So with multi-party computing, you actually don't, even if you store the data technically, you have no way personally, if you're running this particular application, to have access to that personal information. So that's a particular hint on a paradigm that we think will have enormous importance in the context of actual decentralized application development.
Thank you so much for your answer, Chris. And Charles, hope your question is answered. The next question is from Jose. First of all, thank you so much. Thank you very much for the great insight. I'm a tech enthusiast lawyer from Portugal. I'm almost a Bitcoin maximalist by now. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how you think a blockchain solution really could solve the long unsolved digital copyright problems for artists, giving them back the control over the artistic creation in the digital environment.
Yeah, so
right.
it's a very difficult topic, obviously, because there's another chasm, obviously, that we need to cross that we're quite far away from crossing, meaning whatever exists in the real world, somehow you need to be able to quote unquote tokenize it. It's a terrible term, by the way, but the point being is that there's no way around the fact that there still needs to be oftentimes humans involved that have to be attached to some form of a reputation system that will certify the fact that this, in the art case, is an original work of art. Other solutions, however, that are more subtle, i.e. if you think about the supply chain example that I made earlier, can readily identify fakes. If you think about the fact that if you're moving things around in the real world, if you can track them reliably on a supply chain, it's fairly easy to detect fakes, meaning think about the fact that I can look up the ownership of a particular artwork and I can reliably establish that this particular art at this particular moment hangs in the Louvre or some other art collector's house. So it can't possibly be the original art at this particular point in time. So it's kind of like with your iPhone, if you're sitting here and you detect there's a ping coming from another location, you know that you don't have it anymore, it's stolen. Kind of the same idea pertains to any real world assets in that particular instance. But I think more important is to start developing solutions that outline what we were trying to do with this little example, as in you want to create the ownership rights on the blockchain before you create the real world item. It's obviously easy if it's an NFT that's purely digital. If you have a purely digital item like a CryptoKitty, or a more complex one like a D-Goods, which is the NFT standard on EOS.io, that transcends in-game items and their qualities in more detail. That already exists in that particular sense, albeit the protocols need to be extended to be able to carry all the information that you need to obtain once you receive this particular quote-unquote token. But for real world items, think about things like, let's say, a car door. If I create the ownership rights digitally first, embedded into the car as in a QR code, at the moment when this car door fails, at that point in time, I can reliably look back into the supply chain and see it came from this particular roll of sheet metal that was faulty. So rather than recalling 10,000 cars, you only recall the cars that were manufactured using this particular faulty roll. So this is one of the many, many examples you can make, but use any real world item and think how you could initially create a protocol for that, already tracking this. And that's a kind of a call to action that I always put out to anybody who has corporations, companies, access to large databases that already carry information that is very, very nuanced in large quantities. Practical and probably easy to understand example would be if you want to tokenize a house. Well, the tokenization part presumably is the idea of I can break it down and create more liquidity. There's an economical term called the liquidity discount, meaning if something is very hard to move, if I have to get a assessor over there and establish the particular value and then expect it and see, hey, is there any like damages to that property that devalued it? So that particular information needs to be carried in the protocol, needs to be carried in that token that you create. But you need to create this protocol, right? Because otherwise you're looking at the end of the day at a new marketplace. That's kind of the idea for creating tokens. You want to create a marketplace that's efficient, but it's not going to be efficient if you don't get the necessary information reliably you need to make to buy this particular instrument, right? You want to know if you're buying 100 tokens of a particular real estate, is there deferred maintenance that makes this particular real estate worth less than the next token I'm looking at, right? And so I encourage everybody, if you have access to that, just start creating these protocols, just creating these standards, put them out there as open source, start using it. And you can start even with something very simple, like start with an XML protocol, right? Where you just try to capture all the metadata that pertains to a particular asset. And that's why I'm very disappointed with people that were working on ERC 721, the original NFT standard and so forth, that they haven't doubled down on that and expanded on that, because that's really what's needed at the end of the day if you want to realize the ultimate goal of a peer-to-peer transfer of something that's quote unquote a digital asset.
Thank you so much, Jose. I hope your question is answered.
Yeah, otherwise
another...
just email
yeah.
me. I mean, I'm always happy to have these discussions individually, because a lot of these topics I actually do separate 1 hour, 2 hour talks on.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much, Jose. I hope your question is answered. If not, we're gonna post the, I guess Christian's gonna give the email to contact you.
Oh,
right?
oh, Dalia, are you actually seeing me or still my on hold screen here?
We do see your whole screen.
Oh, okay. And I'm always smiling so nicely in the camera for no particular purpose then. Okay, let me change that. How do I do that?
Just stop sharing.
Huh?
You can stop sharing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No,
Can't even
doesn't
find
work.
myself here. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Hey, you can see me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we also have a couple of more questions. So the first question from Charles. I'm from a security perspective, how could Ethereum be used to protect against botnet attacks?
Against botnet attacks. Wow, that's really not my area of expertise. And I'm also a little bit confused about the botnet aspect of it. I have to get back to you on that. As I said, I mean, we have security guys on our team, and that's not me.
Okay, so the second question from Charles as well. Do you see any value in obtaining Ethereum certification? If yes, any particular governing body?
I don't. I really don't. It's more about producing actual code. I mean, we're hiring blockchain engineers right now. And the most important thing is really just looking back at your GitHub depository. What have you been working on? Who have you been contributing to? That says way more. And yeah, also, I mean, our technical guys do these interviews, right? And they don't care about certification. And the space is really governed by hackers for the most part. Right? I don't see a whole lot of value in the curricula as of yet. I mean, eventually we can probably establish one, but the topic itself is evolving so fast that whatever you put in your curriculum is probably outdated by the time you pass it. I mean, we are drinking from a fire hose every day. I mean, there's not a day and probably no more than 5 hours that go by where I don't learn about a new development in the space. It's just super, super fast. My general recommendation would always be focus on the things that you're already excited about, because you're going to be most useful and passionate, and at the end of the day, best at what you're excited about, right? So whatever that development is, and blockchain has so many applications. Just look around, ask yourself, what would I do if I don't get paid for it, and do that, and you'll find someone who wants to pay you for this right now.
Thank you so much, Charles. I hope your question is answered very well. We have a question from Daniel Kim. This question is very big. So the current US government has shown limited knowledge, curiosity, creativity, and motivation with respect to blockchain, which has undoubtedly shaped innovation, implementation, and integration in the US relative to other developed countries. So could you please share your predictions and concerns under a second term for the current administration versus the first term under a new administration?
Yeah, I definitely share your concerns, Daniel, and that's why we are actually actively engaging in shaping this. So I've been asked to help developing a blockchain-friendly legislation for California. We're currently fighting, you might have heard this, although it's been pretty much under wraps. There was a bill introduced by a California legislator that was not dissimilar to the bit license. We seem to have it defeated, but it's still out there. So we need to first and foremost stop this, because yes, other jurisdictions are far ahead of us. And I always encourage everybody, look back to a statement that Andreas Antonopoulos gave for the Canadian legislators. And I think it might have been 5 years ago at this point in time. It's very enlightened, gives you very good ideas. My prediction is that those legislations and those nation states that are implementing it faster, i.e. I became a e-citizen of Estonia. They already implement blockchain-based solutions years ago, a couple of years ago already. And those nations, what will happen is they're gonna be way more efficient, right, in their government structures. And at the end of the day, we are competing as a nation with other countries. And also, I think most importantly, what we're going to see is, as you guys know, China has openly announced that they're creating a digital currency that is government sponsored. I have my suspicion what their reasoning behind this is, but needless to say, it makes their internal organization structure so much more efficient. If you think about the money that's wasted in this country by basically putting money in envelopes. If you think about the idea that we're still using checks, these are true damages on our economy, right? That's like saying to a citizen, well, you can't use email, you have to still use letters, right? So that will be our scenario if we allow other countries to develop these particular solutions sponsored by the governments there, and we are going to be left behind. And also, I think overarching, there's a true concern that the current implementation of what we call money or fiat, which is not really money, which is a debt certificate, the fact that the United States has been able to print this is largely associated with the circumstance that the US dollar is the international reserve currency. Needless to say, other countries don't necessarily want this to be the case in the future. If that's no longer the case, as a country, we'll likely use the ability to basically export our debts. So that could lead to a very prolonged recession or even depression in the United States. And I think it's a real threat. It's basically a coin toss, and we all should work towards educating our legislators. And we're trying to do this. I mean, we've been contributing to campaigns and putting ourselves out there to educate. Our approach has always been, and we use this for investment as well, very much that of a scientist, as in we're putting out theories and we're trying to educate people to actually learn those particular concepts. And you guys are doing a good job by simply already being on this call. So I would encourage everybody to carry out this message, because it's going to be super important for your future and for the future of the country that you're living in, to actually embrace these technologies.
Thank you so much, Chris. Daniel, I hope your question is answered. The last question from Robin. What backgrounds are good to help programmers learn faster? You think it's Java or Go?
So yeah, I mean, as you guys know, Ethereum uses Solidity, Bitcoin, C++. It's good to know both of them. A lot of the applications that are being built are using newer frameworks like Flutter, which is something that we really like, which is really pragmatic, which allows you to develop one app rather than trying to build many different apps for the different devices and so forth. Those are very practical implementations that are not necessarily limited to blockchain. It's important to understand blockchain principles, I think. There's not enough people at this point in time, technologists specifically, that understand blockchain principles, because the discipline of blockchain is really comprised of many different disciplines, if you think about it. So you got coding, of course, and that's kind of the majority of people in this space right now. They have an engineering background. But what we don't really have enough of is people that have kind of a hybrid background. I have this kind of unique background where I was a coder for a short period of time in the 80s and then went to law school. But people who have this particular background are very, very rare. So from that perspective, we need legal engineers, if you will. We need regulation engineers, so they understand both how the law works and how regulation works and are able to transcend this into technologies. So that is a super rare, super important skill. So if you also take classes outside of engineering that foster your knowledge in those related areas. And don't please go to like MBA classes and so forth, because unfortunately, these are just very terrible, particularly in this country. Oftentimes, and that's an anecdote that I have to repeat every week, we get a slide here presented to us. Hey, we are really qualified to provide a solution in this space because our whatever CTO, VP of anything has a 10-year banking background. Well, that's like saying we have this jockey who's going to fly our stealth fighter. That you have been in banking for 10 years utterly disqualifies you from being able to understand what's being built right now, right? If you the most visible example for this is Skype, right? So Skype did not build new phones. They made the phone utterly useless. The phone became optional, right? So now banks and bankers are optional.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Robin, I hope your question is answered. So we don't have any question. Oh, we actually do. Oh, this is like just a thank you note. Great analogy. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. That was very interesting lecture and very informative. Yeah, it was a great presentation. And thank you again for collaboration with ideas. We appreciate your effort, your experience that you have and that you share it with our audience. So I guess our presentation is going to the end. So I hope everyone had a great time this Saturday evening. I'm gonna pull up the polling for everyone. So if you have a minute to spend, just briefly share your experience with this particular presentation with us. And Chris, I think you also have a ability to vote in this specific poll.
I see it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope to see everyone again for the next workshop. And if you would like to share this specific presentation with your colleagues or your peers, just simply follow us on LinkedIn. We're going to share the link for this YouTube presentation. So you will be having it soon on our YouTube channel.